Bienvenue à celles et ceux qui viennent de nous rejoindre. Je vous ai invité tout à l'heure à prendre les oreillettes. Je vois que la consigne a été suivie. Je vous en remercie. Alors, c'est l'un des plus féroces critiques de l'activité des GAFAM, de notre fascination pour le tout-technologique ou encore de la montée en puissance des acteurs privés dans le domaine des transports et de la ville. Evgeny Morozov, essayiste mondialement réputé, est avec nous aujourd'hui. Ce penseur américain d'origine biélorusse prône un retour fort du politique. Il refuse la croyance selon laquelle l'innovation et la technologie pourront résoudre tous les problèmes sociaux, environnementaux et politiques. Crise des migrants, abstention, changement climatique, tous les sujets seront abordés par l'auteur de « Pour tout résoudre, cliquez ici, l'aberration du solutionnisme technologique ». C'est Guillaume Gralet, qui est rédacteur en chef Tech, Sciences et Santé au point, à qui revient le plaisir de questionner. On peut les applaudir.
Bonjour à tous. Evgeny, dobro požalovat, which means welcome.
Merci.
Evgeny, vous avez l'habitude de dire que la technologie que l'on a est celle que l'on mérite. Et depuis plusieurs années, et de manière encore plus pertinente et sévère aujourd'hui, vous dites que beaucoup de choses sont cassées. Qu'est-ce que la technologie a cassé aujourd'hui ?
Ok. Je répondrai en anglais, comme vous peut-être déjà savez. Look, I think the main message I've been trying to send to my readers, but also to the audience at large over the last decade, in my books, in my talks, in my articles, has been that technology does not have any predefined trajectory. So technology can be very oppressive, and it can be used for surveillance and manipulation, and that's the technology we have by and large now, even though even this surveillance-heavy technology now and then produces some benefits, which are very hard to deny. But technology can also mean something else. It can be used to boost solidarity. It can be used to give us a world where knowledge is accessible without having to give up your data. It can completely revolutionize how we do healthcare and how we actually think about each other in the state. And Silicon Valley and this kind of big tech, as we come to call it now, backed by a lot of money. Some of that money from Wall Street, some of that money from Silicon Valley. Increasingly, that money is coming also from governments like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or United Arab Emirates. They have a vision for how this technology should develop, and they have been shaping and leading its development for the last decade. I don't think that this model is sustainable. It's not sustainable for democracy. It's not sustainable for economy. It's not sustainable for politics. I will explain why I think it's unsustainable. But at the same time, before I go into this critique, I would like to leave us with this optimistic vision and path. And it's that with the different configurations of forces and with a different ideology, we can have a technology that would actually help us reduce inequality, that would help us make knowledge more accessible, and that would make us build a society that's more just and fair. So we should not give up on technology. I'm not by any means a technophobe. Now, why is it not sustainable? I can explain now. You can ask me that, and I will answer.
Donc on a la chance de pouvoir parler en français avec Evgeny qui parle, on l'a dit hier, en plus du russe, du chinois qui va apprendre, de l'espagnol et de l'allemand. Et donc on va bien sûr lui demander pourquoi. Et il a raison de dire, Evgeny, qu'on n'a pas totalement envie d'abandonner la technologie. Il a d'ailleurs un projet absolument génial qui s'appelle The Syllabus, sur lequel vous pouvez retrouver des contenus triés qui sont particulièrement pertinents, avec des commentaires. Et Evgeny va nous expliquer la démarche de cette création tout à l'heure. On va revenir au diagnostic. Pourquoi c'est si dangereux et pourquoi c'est pas relevant, pas pertinent en tout cas toutes les solutions qu'apporte la technologie aujourd'hui.
Yes. So, look, in 2019, it's still common for many of us to read the newspapers, maybe magazines like yours, and think that technology is the solution to the problems that we face as a democratic society. That perhaps it's technology that can help us fight foreign interference in elections, which is what Facebook keeps telling us. Maybe technology is the way to make our cities more sustainable because we can have this electric scooters everywhere. Maybe technology is the way to make it easier a little bit for the middle classes to make a living because they can suddenly put their apartments on Airbnb, for example, right? So this discourse of technology as our savior, it's still very much strong. It's a little bit weaker because people are beginning to understand that something in this equation of technology being the savior doesn't add up, right? But I think by and large, most people still accept this vision that technology is here to help us. And I would argue that the technology that we are currently being given by Google, by Amazon, by Microsoft, by these giants with Japanese and Saudi Arabia money in the SoftBank, for example, it's a set of technologies that cannot possibly deliver on their promises. And the reason why they have delivered on those promises until now is because they have been extremely clever at exploiting various resources. Uber has been very clever at exploiting the drivers. So the drivers have to get their own car. Very often they have to finance it. And if you look at what they actually earn, the earnings are minimal. Very often they actually lose money. But since it's invisible or it's concealed, we think that it's a model that works. And if you go and analyze many of these technologies in a similar manner, you will see that they are based on essentially manipulation of some kind. It's manipulation of financial statements, it's manipulation of public perceptions, it's a manipulation of basically their statements of profitability. I mean, if you look at a company like WeWork or even Uber, right, in the last 3 months, these companies went from being the darlings of Wall Street and of investors to essentially becoming almost bankrupt. We don't even know if WeWork will survive. Uber, even though you all maybe take it or have used it, and you would probably know that it's a company that offers you rides that are cheaper than the taxi industry, if you look at it closely, it's a company that loses billions every year. Last year it lost something like 5 billion. The year before it lost something like 5 billion. This year I'm sure it has lost already more than 5 billion, right? And if you look at it closely, how can a company that keeps losing $5 billion or euros a year stay in business, right? It's not a model that works. And the only reason why they have stayed in business is because they've managed to convince a couple of investors with very deep pockets that one day Uber might make a profit. How would it make a profit? We don't know. The most likely explanation that Uber is to give you if you were to press them on this question would be that they will one day automate everything so that drivers will no longer even be driving cars, so that the expenses related to labor will disappear, and that way you will end up with a service that is very cheap, or at least it's extremely efficient. There are no people to employ, and you can enjoy it while still paying lower fares, and Uber will enjoy profitability. And this model, I doubt that it will ever work because they will run out of cash and the investors will abandon them before the future arrives. But even if you assume that that future will one day arrive, you have to understand that the consequences of that would be that your transportation system will be owned and run by investors behind Uber. It will not be run by you here locally, and no money that enters Uber will stay locally here in Toulouse or in France. So the money that you'll be spending on transportation, because Uber also doesn't pay a lot of tax in Europe, if they pay anything at all, that money will end up in the pockets of the investors, which are all sitting in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And to me, that's not a sustainable model. It doesn't mean that we cannot build a ride-sharing service that will be automated and that will be efficient and that might actually not feature any drivers. But we can do it by keeping the service under our public democratic control and distribute all the savings and all the gains and all the profits among our society here locally, because that's where value is produced, and not in Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. And that, I think, is something that we still haven't understood, and that's why governments, instead of pursuing an active digital public policy in this space, have completely surrendered to deep-pocketed investors like SoftBank, and essentially they're very passive. All they can do is just to create conditions for such investors to come in and go about buying and purchasing companies like Uber or expanding them locally.
Mais imaginons, Evgeny, que nos gouvernements, enfin nos responsables politiques se réveillent et se disent on s'est fait avoir, aujourd'hui par les Américains, demain par les Chinois, il faut qu'on se réveille, il faut qu'on crée nous-mêmes des sociétés qui peuvent reposer sur d'autres modèles, par exemple OpenStreetMap qui va reposer sur des données qui viennent de toutes les personnes. Qu'est-ce que ces responsables politiques devraient initier?
Well, I think, look, above all, what's missing among our political classes in almost every European country. You know, and I live in Europe, I don't live in America, I move a lot between Italy and Spain, so I kind of know the context also of Southern Europe quite a bit. The problem is that there is a lack of vision of how a society that has access to advanced technologies, how it should function, and how it can function in the benefits of citizens. Once we can gather that vision, you know, and think about a digital society and economy that not only works in the interests of consumers, right, who are interested in just one thing. You know, as a consumer, you're only interested in diversity of products and low prices, right? That's why you can go to a supermarket and satisfy all your needs there, and that's it, right? And you cannot possibly scale that model to the entirety of society. You cannot provide education, transportation, health, and many other services based on this consumer-oriented model because it's not that simple, right? And if you don't do it based on the consumer model, you have to understand what would a citizenship-based model in this domain entail. What would it mean to offer an education service that is all digital, right? But that does not treat a user as a customer, but treats it as somebody with rights, somebody who has some kind of civic sense of responsibility and who is not just a figure in a supermarket. Once we manage to develop that vision, and I think, you know, there are some early signs at the municipal level in places like Barcelona, in Amsterdam, a little bit in Berlin. I'm sure there are initiatives of that kind in France as well, where at the local level, we're beginning to understand that you can actually provide a service like Uber locally without relying on big money coming from Saudi Arabia. And you can do it in the interest of citizens, so people will have guaranteed access to certain services. They will not be discriminated against based on their rating. You know, if you look at Uber, for example, in a country like Australia, if your passenger rating falls below 4, you are not allowed to use Uber app. So you cannot call an Uber car, right? Because as you might know, all passengers in Uber get a rating. Drivers give that rating, right? And a model where you can be excluded from the provision of a transportation service because your rating falls below a certain figure entirely determined through private contracting, to me it's an offense against democratic rights of citizens. And think about many cases that we already have in France where your public administrations contract with Uber to offer services, for example, at night. I know that there are places in Nice and in other cities in France where Uber already provides nighttime transportation services, paid for out of public pocket. Imagine a system where you would not be able to use it because Uber decided that you are a threat to society of some kind, right? And especially once you merge it with all of the databases that are now being gathered with regards to facial recognition, DNA, all the data mining that's going to happen on social media, it becomes a nightmarish scenario. So to bring it to something a little bit more concrete, we have to start by remembering that there is a very different model informed by citizenship and rights, based on which services can be offered. B, we have to understand what are the preconditions that, and infrastructures essentially, that we need to control in order to be able to do that. So data, we need to have a very robust, sophisticated discussion about what kind of data we want, what kind of rights we want to have on the data. Should we think about collective and social rights for certain types of data? Should we think about individual rights for others? Should we think about data as a public good in some cases? Should we think about data as an asset? Those, I think, are reasonable discussions which are beginning to some extent, but not fast enough, on which political parties should have a position. Parties of the right will say it's a private property. Parties of the left, if there are still any left by that time, will say it's a collective good and a public good, and there should be some kind of a social rights infrastructure around it.
Donc il faudrait réécrire la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et y ajouter par exemple des règles sur l'utilisation par exemple des données, des data personnelles.
Well, I mean, look, we can, of course, keep pushing for GDPR and similar interventions, the right to be forgotten. We can also, recover all of the previous declarations about human rights. All of that is good. I'm not against it, and I think, we should be enforcing those laws. The problem is that we have to understand what we want out of that data, because we cannot just, the lawyers and people dealing with data protection have one goal, right? It's protecting the data. It cannot exhaust the entirety of users of that data, because some of the data is genuinely useful, and they have to find ways in which we can tap into it in a way that would not compromise our privacy and the privacy of the users to generate extra value. I think it's useful to know where people are going in the cities if you are a city planner. I think it's a useful, and what I don't want to happen is for the likes of Orange or Deutsche Telekom or Telefonica, the big telecom operators in every European country, or the likes of Google or Microsoft or Cisco, the kind of companies working on other layers, to claim that data as theirs and then to charge the city for using it. I think that data is often gathered with infrastructures that we have set up with our own taxes, and there is absolutely no reason why we should be paying for it twice. So it's a political question, right? And it's a question that you cannot easily answer just by searching for an answer in the Declaration of Universal Human Rights or in GDPR or in the right to be forgotten. This is something that our political system has to articulate based on concerns, I think, of citizens and citizen groups and associations.
Mais est-ce que le problème ne vient pas de la nature même de la technologie qui favorise l'accumulation rapide de parts de marché? On le voit dans un débat qu'anime notamment Margaret Vestager, qui a interviewé cette semaine dans Le Point, la concentration de richesses avec des inégalités qui n'ont jamais été aussi importantes, peut-être plus tard de la propriété et de l'utilisation des données. Mais comment redécentraliser tout ça et comment redistribuer les règles du jeu?
Well, look, you already assume an answer in your question. So the answer in your question is that we need to decentralize it all and maybe have smaller players. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the whole answer. I think our answer should be, it should not start with the kind of our favorite policy tool. And our favorite policy right now is competition. So what do we do given all the threats I've been outlining? Well, we need to make the playing field more competitive, as policymakers say, right? So we need to make sure that Facebook is again separated into Instagram and WhatsApp, and we need to make sure that Google cannot take advantage of Android. All of that, I think, is robust. We can have that discussion. This is all very useful. But what I'm proposing is that instead, we have to perhaps adopt a somewhat different type of thinking and try to understand, well, if we were to treat data as infrastructure of some kind, can we create maybe some kind of national data fund where such data would accrue with a certain set of rights and regulations? It will be protected, so you will not be able to know who that data was generated by, but you would be able to access and examine some of its attributes. So you would know that somebody has been in this particular park on this particular day, and that person before has been to another place, but you would not know who they are or where they went next, right? And I think if we manage to, and such technologies exist, so we have enough sophistication in terms of encryption to hide some of the most problematic elements and aspects of data so that personal identities would not be compromised. Once we do that, then using even technologies like the blockchain to some extent, I think we can create a layer which would be treated differently, right? And then with that layer, you can set your policy. So if you have this national data fund, we to some extent, we treat natural resources that way. We treat national treasures that way. We treat art, collective memory that way. We treat them as something that cannot be bought, thought, exchanged. But it's something around which robust ecosystems and new services can be built. So the way I would work on it, I would try at the European level, declare data as something that cannot be bought and sold. It's something that belongs to the nation and belongs to citizens. And then I would use public policy to stipulate and articulate conditions of access to the data. So I would say, okay, you're a foreign company from China, or you're a foreign company from Saudi Arabia, or from the United States, and you have 10,000 employees. You would like to come to Toulouse and work with the data of local citizens. fine, this is the fee you have to pay, and this fee is 10 times higher than the fee that a local startup from Toulouse would need to pay to access the same data, because they're local, they contribute to the local economy, they employ people locally, and they just have 20 employees. And if there is an NGO in Toulouse, a non-profit association of some kind that would like to use the same data, not only would they get access to it for free, but they would also receive a grant of some kind from the state or from the region to do that. And if we manage to get to that level of granularity, I think we would have a very different, a very robust digital economy, and it would not require necessarily breaking up these firms, but it would require taking a stance. And we need to take a stance and say that, look, guys, it's like the Wild West. You moved in here, you grabbed all this data, we were asleep at the wheel, now we woke up, we want the data back, and we will not let you exploit it unless you pay us back. You don't want to pay us taxes, at least pay us for the use of that data, a licensing fee of some kind.
C'est un changement de paradigme absolument génial. Mais pourquoi se limiter à l'Europe? C'est trop tard de le faire au niveau du monde entier?
Well, I think, again, it depends on, I mean, of course, you can do it anywhere else you want. I mean, you can do it in the United States, you can do it in China, and I think maybe if you have a change in the political administration in the US, if you have Bernie Sanders coming to power, Elizabeth Warren, maybe such ideas will eventually surface also in their debate. I think much here depends on just how, what your value system is like. If in Europe our value system is that we would like to promote small and medium enterprises, we would like to promote civic associations, we'd like to promote civil society, and we would like to keep full control over how our data is used and accessed, because this is essentially the fundamental factor that shapes our rights, right? And we treasure our rights in Europe, we would do that. I'm not sure that the same level of concerns exist in China and the United States. And this is why I don't expect them to jump on this immediately. In China, this is driven by a very different set of objectives. I mean, some of them have to do with state
C'est
control.
peut-être le cas des citoyens chinois, mais on ne le sait pas en fait.
Well, but again, I think we have to start somewhere. And I think in Europe, since we have a very big market, if it were just France, it would not fly. If it were just Germany, it would not fly. But we have a very big market of, almost 500 million people. It's, one of the, if you count it all, it's the largest market in the world, while the UK is still part of it. And you can actually dictate the terms to those companies. And we have not used that capacity widely. The danger, of course, would be that national powers, police, national intelligence services, they would like to abuse that fund.
Exactement. C'était la dernière question sur cette nouvelle gouvernance. Est-ce que ça doit être les autorités publiques, à quelque niveau que ce soit, local ou national ou européen, ou est-ce que ça peut être des associations de citoyens?
Well, in what sense? That who presents the great danger? Or,
voilà, pour représenter, pour organiser cette...
Yeah, well, I think here it's inevitable that we will need to rely on the state. I'm sorry to bring you the bad news. I mean, there is absolutely no way that the system would work without strong infrastructure for storing data, protecting data, encrypting data. That will need to be financed by somebody, and that need to be maintained. So I'm not naive enough to think that a bunch of NGOs would be able to pull it off. It will require a strong presence by the state. It will require the European Commission to be very active in it, but without a strong civil society, without strong privacy advocates who will come in and participate in all of the discussion. Without, you also have your privacy institutions like SNIL here in France. CNIL, yeah, without them, you would not be able to have a robust solution. It will be immediately compromised. But the thing is that look at what the other option is. The other option is just leaving all of this data with Facebook, Instagram, and Google, and still having the state access it and use it and abuse it any way they want. I mean, that's more or less the current future that we expect in 1 or 2 years, if not already. So it's not as if we will be moving to something worse.
Okay.
At this point, it's already full accessible.
Alors, Evgeny, maintenant, je vais prendre un peu le mauvais rôle. Je vais essayer de défendre un peu les technologies. Alors, on a bien vu que sur la liberté d'expression, c'était très tricky, c'est-à-dire qu'il y avait le bon côté un petit peu, mais il y avait aussi toute la surveillance. On a vu tous les dissidents qui ont été pourchassés, certains même emprisonnés pour beaucoup dans le monde entier, manipulés avec l'affaire Cambridge Analytica. Mais on dit aussi que les technologies peuvent apporter du bien en termes de médecine personnalisée, par exemple. Est-ce que ça, il faut tout jeter aussi, ou est-ce qu'on peut refonder tout ça?
Well, I mean, look, I think my vision is quite positive. I mean, in general, of what can be done if we manage to regain control over some of the key technologies of the day. Artificial intelligence, I see nothing wrong in it, as long as it's treated as a public good to which we all have access, right? And the access is not decided by Amazon or by Google or by Uber. And it's true that once properly deployed, and once it's tied to the right political economic system, it will drastically reduce how much emissions we emit into the atmosphere. It will dramatically increase our ability to produce things in a more sustainable and efficient manner. The question there, I think the reason why so many people have anxieties of artificial intelligence is because they understand that as things develop right now, there is no chance in the world that they will be its beneficiaries, because they think that the only use of AI in their life, it will be to get fired because they'll be replaced by a job that will be automated, or there will be some kind of auto-operated drone that will fly over their head and will police them and tell them where to go. And clearly, under those conditions, I'll be very pessimistic on technology, but the fact that our imagination is limited only to those two uses, it's the result of our impotence, political impotence, intellectual impotence, and our inability to regain control over the political and democratic process. Because I can imagine a future where the gains will be distributed more fairly, where the number of hours we work will be reduced, and where, nonetheless, the immense savings that will be done due to automation will be redistributed back into society instead of flowing to Saudi Arabia and replacing their oil revenue with the new revenue that will come from artificial intelligence. So in that sense, I think we should make sure that our universities do work on new ways to deploy AI for healthcare, new ways to learn things in the education sphere. All of that is useful, but it's a little bit premature to be so obsessed with particular uses where it's not at all obvious what the political strategy for democratizing access and ownership of it would be like. And the problem with our debate about technology in the last 10 years is that it's very easy to get obsessed about the blockchain, about AI, about the Internet of Things, about the smart city, not realizing that all of these technologies are in the hands of these big funds. And as long as they're in the hands of these big funds, their potential spillover effect on democracy, on justice, on fairness will be minimal. And investors keep giving us these new shiny technologies and we keep getting excited about them. The problem is that unless we democratize access to them, their ownership and their control, none of that will come to any positive use for the citizens themselves.
Alors, en préparant cette intervention, on s'est dit que ça serait super d'avoir pas mal de questions de la salle, donc on va bien sûr vous donner le micro très vite. J'avais juste une dernière question sur cette nouvelle méfiance dans une technologie plus constructive, c'est qu'il faut faire attention où vont les données, où vont les fonds, qu'ils n'aillent pas tous chez des fonds en Arabie Saoudite et au détriment en fait, des gens qui utilisent les technologies au quotidien. Est-ce que créer ce nouveau monde technologique, peut-être plus responsable, plus distribué, ça veut dire arrêter la globalisation pour vous?
Well, to some extent, I mean, of course, as you said at the beginning, the technologies we have are the technologies we deserve. So to some extent, something like Uber would never be possible in a world where companies can enter any market, they can store data wherever they want, they're not obliged to keep anything locally, they're not obliged to pay taxes locally, and they can essentially come in, offer every service remotely, and then you cannot even kick them out because they're not physically present in your country, and they don't even employ people who work for them because they say they're independent contractors. So I wouldn't blame everything on globalization. So I think it's equally the result of, if you want, financialization or neoliberalization. I mean, it's a result of some process, right? Or a chain of processes, which, of course, we haven't fully grappled with and understood. And I think technology now, and the debate we are having about inequality, for example, and the way in which we connect the debate about inequality to the debate of technology, it suddenly brings these processes into view. So it becomes obvious that, why on earth should a company like Amazon make so much money in Europe and then pay fewer taxes that, a student pays? I mean, it's unthinkable, but that's in fact what has been happening. And clearly, it's not the result of them being super efficient or using data centers or using something else. It's the result of them using legal and financial arbitrage to minimize their tax bill. And in that sense, I think we don't need to reverse globalization. We just need to make it more just. And that is, something we've been trying to do for 2 or 3 decades. But I think that with this new generation of technology companies, the need for this is ever more urgent. Because if you don't do that, the level of poverty and the level of discontent and the number of angry people in the streets that I already encountered today on the way to the conference, they will dramatically increase.
Mais la globalisation, c'est quoi ce qui a été positif? Ça a quand même sorti pas mal de millions de personnes de la misère ou pas du tout?
Well, but I mean, look, globalization in itself, again, I don't think, I don't think we need to blame everything on globalization. I mean, globalization has positive aspects. I mean, the problem is that we need to understand and articulate what in the old days we used to call progressive internationalism. This is the project of globalization I am behind. It's the kind of, making the world smaller, but on terms that favor certain values. And those values are not those of tax evasion or tax minimization, but those of solidarity and egalitarianism, right? And to some extent, I think the forces and the political forces that could make that project, they're very weak, and in some cases non-existent. So the challenge for us, at least for people who share, my values, should be to understand who the new forces of this political change might be, how they can be supported, but they cannot afford to ignore the question of technology. It cannot just be about them instrumentally using WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter to mobilize people. It has to be about them figuring out what a very different set of infrastructures for this new progressive internationalism should entail.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions dans la salle? Tariq qui voudra en poser une, je crois, premier rang. Juste là. Sinon, attends, je vais donner le micro. Merci.
Je vais parler en français puisque Evgeny comprend parfaitement. Dans la conversation qu'on a eue hier, il y a quelque chose que tu as dit et qui m'a frappé et que j'avais envie un peu de répéter aujourd'hui. C'est que finalement, dans le monde réel dans lequel on vit, il y a plusieurs espaces. Il y a l'espace personnel, celui dont on vit, son propre espace, sa famille, son espace familial. Il y a l'espace professionnel, l'espace public et l'espace privé quand on va dans des malls, enfin dans des supermarchés ou dans un environnement commercial. Et en fait, le numérique a fait que c'est les mêmes entreprises maintenant qui sont dans ces 4 espaces. Et curieusement, quand on parle de vision politique de l'Internet en France, mais aussi en Europe, désormais, on a l'impression que l'État n'a plus de rôle à jouer. L'État et d'ailleurs tout ce qui n'est pas commercial, les espaces non commerciaux n'ont plus de rôle à jouer dans le numérique. On a décidé, de la même manière qu'on a des hôpitaux publics, des écoles publiques, c'est-à-dire que l'État investit pour créer un environnement physique. Alors il y a évidemment aussi des hôpitaux privés, des écoles privées, mais on a un espace commun. Dans la vision politique du numérique qui est mise en avant, et d'ailleurs de plus en plus en ce moment, la solution, ce ne sont que des sociétés privées qui opèrent de manière privée et privatisée en dehors des sphères de contrôle des États, ou des accords où en fait on délègue à des sociétés le fait d'exercer le rôle numérique. Ça va être le cas dans la santé où on dit en fait nous on a construit des hôpitaux parmi les plus performants au monde, mais en fait on va demander à des sociétés américaines d'analyser les données. C'est-à-dire que et la question que je me pose, c'est comment peut-on faire pour remettre le non commercial? C'est que moi, en tant qu'entrepreneur, je comprends pour monter des startups, mais c'est un espace différent. Il faut qu'il y ait aussi que les gouvernements, les administrations, les environnements du public soient capables de participer, qu'on construise autre chose et que la réponse au numérique, en fait, ne soit plus décorrélée. C'est qu'on ne dise pas le numérique, c'est les startups et les big tech. Le numérique, il y a plein de gens qui ne sont ni dans les startups ni dans les big tech qui ont un rôle essentiel à jouer dans les administrations, dans les universités. Comment remettre ces gens-là au centre du jeu?
Good. I think here we really need to start with a much more detailed history of what has happened in the last 30 or 40 years. And here I think it's essential to understand that the governments everywhere almost in Western Europe, and especially in the United States, they have undergone a paradigm shift. You know, if in the 50s and 60s, they would think about non-commercial activities, those related to the welfare state, but also those related to arts and culture, they would think of them as essentially wealth generating activities. And by wealth, I don't just mean like monetary wealth, but essentially spiritual, intellectual wealth, knowledge wealth. Then in the 70s and 80s, they started viewing those activities as a cost center. They started viewing them as something that essentially drains the budget and something that needs, if it were to be preserved, switch to the logic of competition. So that whoever still participates in those non-commercial domains, they have to compete with each other for funds, they have to be measured, they have to be in one way or another audited, and they have to be treated in a way that basically treats them as participants in the market, even though they operate in a, what nominally is a non-market domain. And that, I would argue, is the consequence of the public sector and the governments switching to what I would call a neoliberal paradigm of some kind. Because for a neoliberal paradigm, competition is the mother of all good. Competition is good because competition produces knowledge, because firms have to compete with each other to basically generate new techniques of production and reduce costs. And consumers love competition because it basically allows them to articulate new needs, articulate new demands, market will satisfy them, so competition is also good for consumers. And unless we manage to go beyond this idea that the only way to generate knowledge in a modern society is by competition, I don't think we would never be able to articulate a coherent philosophy as to why we need these non-commercial spaces. And I think that we've made a theoretical mistake in accepting competition as the only source of knowledge and not understanding that many of the traditional human activities that involve communities, that involve people living their everyday life, working with their fellow citizens in groups and citizen associations, were just as much, if not more, knowledge intensive, and thus could lead and unlock even more innovation. And that's my last sentence, in responding to this. If we manage to create infrastructures of human collaboration, where people can engage in mutual projects with each other, and we have to be able to do it at scale and at zero costs, and if we manage to create conditions where there is no need for them to form a startup, there is no need for them to form a for-profit association to pursue mutual projects, I'm pretty sure that we would be able to reverse some of that process. You know, if you want, I've written a very long essay on the subject in New Left Review earlier this year. It's around 40 pages, and it goes into quite a lot of detail about this idea of needing to switch or rediscover modes of social coordination, as I call them, that are not underwritten by competition. But I think that's essentially the only way to go, because even if you just try to recover those spaces in the private life, if your private life itself is completely dominated by the principle of competition, it doesn't help. Right? So I think you have to look at that value first and then understand how to redistribute it across private life, social life, public life, and so forth.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question? Il y a plusieurs mains qui se lèvent. Voilà. Le micro arrive.
Bonjour. Si les entreprises ne revendent pas ces données, du coup, comment on pourrait continuer à avoir accès à ces services qui sont du coup gratuits? Est-ce qu'on serait prêt à payer pour ces services?
Yes, well, it's a good question. I mean, essentially, we have to understand that up until now, the reason why we have not had to pay anything for most of the services is because clearly the companies had an incentive to offer them to us for free and to extract as much data as they could, and then to do something with the data, you know, selling advertising or training their AI models. And it's obvious that a world where such an incentive no longer exists would be a world where we would be facing a very different set of services and a very different set of infrastructures which would need to be priced for and paid for differently. Now, I don't think that the right answer to it is to say that we need to have the same very set of services, but all now charging users. You know, there are people in Silicon Valley like Roger McNamee, you know, one of the former investors in Facebook, who just basically says Facebook needs to start charging you a monthly fee and that monthly fee will reduce the incentives that Facebook has to collect data, and that will reduce the problems of manipulating your attention, and all the things and all the problems will be solved. I don't think that that's the answer. Our answer should be trying to imagine what alternative public and social institutions of this new digital age could be and should be. You know, we had, for example, you know it much better than I do in France, we have invented, as I was saying yesterday in the same format, in the same discussion, we invented things like the post office and the library and the university and the museum for a reason, right? We did not set up a post office on the assumption that the post office would open up all of your letters, read them, and insert an ad, and then stamp it and pass it on, and that way you wouldn't have to pay. Right? That was not the assumption. We built it on the assumption that you would contribute something and the state will subsidize the rest, because it's important to build a communications infrastructure that can keep the country communicating. So in that sense, I think we should not limit ourselves to this binary choice of you either get free services from these firms in exchange for data, or you'll get paid services from them. I think it's a false choice. The real choice is figuring out what sort of institutions and arrangements and property rights we need to have in place to set up a system that meets our goals. And that's the question, you know, what our goals are. That's the big question that we are afraid to even answer, because it's not something that political forces of today are prepared to tackle in any level of sophistication or complexity.
Donc la Poste a inventé une boîte mail bien avant tous les sites internet. Est-ce qu'on a le temps de prendre une toute dernière question, Boris?
Non.
Non.
Je suis vraiment le père Fouettard, je suis confus. Hein.
Ok, je vais juste poser une dernière question, en 10 secondes. Qu'est-ce que tu nous conseilles de lire, Evgeny? Qu'est-ce qu'il faut lire aujourd'hui?
Wow, well, you know, as... well, read, let me tell you something.
Syllabus?
No, well, the syllabus, yeah. I should read my project called The Syllabus, yes, of course. But I think read journals which try to lie as much as possible about the state of capitalism. And they happen to be capitalist journals. So read Financial Times, read Wall Street Journal, read, you know, Les Echos, read maybe Le Point. Read publications where you can actually understand what on earth is happening without much ideological cloud hanging above your face. You know, the reason why I even know which funds are investing into which companies is because I made myself a habit of every day following the movements, you know, follow the money. And the best way to follow the money is to specialize in the movements of capital. So stick to that, and you'll probably have a better understanding of technology than if you read technology-only publications.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, on peut les applaudir. Merci beaucoup.